Welcome guys to this new video, and in this video we are going to be talking about pagination. That's handling the functionality for these pagination arrows, where on click on any of these arrows I want to be able to change the page. That's the current page of data displaying on our data table. So without any further wastage of time, let's head over to our code. And so far, here's what we have in our code for the part of our code that renders data to our data table. So before going to the pagination functionality proper, I'm going to adjust some of these. I actually want to clean up this function a bit because it's looking quite cumbersome. So I'm going to separate this filter function, that's for the search functionality, into a different function out of the whole of this block of code. So I'm going to erase this, take this off, and paste this here. So now we're sorting this search data by key, no longer all our general students. And this search data is going to hold the students, that's the already searched students, which match what is in our query field. So now we have to import this state, we have to create this state. So I'm going to head over to where we have these states, and I'm going to add this new state. So now we have this search data state, which holds the students which match the value in our query field or in our search bar. So now what I want to do is I want to create the search function, because we remove the function from below, so I have to recreate that function. So I'm going to come beneath the sort by key function and recreate the search function. So let's just go ahead and paste this here. And now we have this search function, and it's practically the same function which was there below. That's for the filter, where we're filtering all our students for the students which name and matricle match what is in our query. So we're taking our students array, and yeah, we're actually filtering the students. And beneath here we have this use effect, in which we set the state of our search data state. So it's actually in this use effect that every time the program runs and the query changes or the value in our search bar changes, we want to rerun this use effect, which is going to provide us with new search students. So beneath here, we're actually just taking those search students, and it's actually what we're sorting in our code. So this looks a lot cleaner, and it's going to permit us to carry out the same search functionality with our code being cleaner. So I'm going to take out this for the moment and save, just to ensure that our search functionality still works. So now we're going to check in our browser, and now if I type Alice, we get Alice Johnson. If I tap Johnson, we get all the John and the Johnson. So our search functionality still works. Alright, so with that out of the way, we can return back to our code and start coding the pagination functionality proper. So for pagination, actually what we want to do is we want to handle on-click events for each of these icons. That's the double left icon, right icon, and the double right icon. So on click on the double left icon, we want to go to the first page. For the left icon, we want to go to the previous page. For the right icon, we want to go to the next page, and for the double right icon, we want to go to the very last page. So to do this, we are going to make use of three states. So I'm just going to go to where we have our states and add three new states, which are going to help us to perform this functionality. So I'm going to come below here and add those new states. So now these are the three new states we added, and we have this page index state, and this page index state, it holds the index of the current page we are displaying. That's it tells us which page we want to display. The number of records state tells us the number of records we want to display on each page. Let's say you have 20 records in your database, but you want to display 5 at a time or 10 at a time, and so on. So that value is going to be held in this number of record states, and we gave it the default value of 5. Whereas the page index, we gave it a default value of 1, because obviously initially you want to display the first page. Now the data length state holds, that's the current number of items in your database or the current number of records in your database. So you actually, this is very important because you need this value in order to be able to calculate the number of pages you want to display and so on. Now, for our pagination functionality, what we want is at any given time to be able to display a number of records, which is a fraction of the records contained in our database. So we actually need a function which is going to be able to take these parameters or this state and calculate or return to us the number of records which meet our requirement. So let's say we have 20 records and we want to display 5 at any given time. Then using this page index, we want to be able to select the particular 5 records which are going to be returned to us and which we are going to display on our table. So I'm going to create a function which is going to do just that using these parameters. So depending on the data length, the number of records, and the page index, that function is going to return to us the number of records which we have to be displaying on our table. So I'm going to come beneath let's just say this search function or this use effect and add that new function. So let's add it over here, and now we have this new function which says paginate. So we now have this paginate function, and what we want this paginate function to do practically is the function should take an array of elements, and using this slice method is going to return to us a portion of that array from a start index to an end index. That's going to help us actually to perform our pagination functionality. So depending on the page index and the number of records, let's take our base scenario where our page index is 1 and our number of records is 5. What we want to do is we want to return the first 5 elements. So our start index has to be 0, whereas our end index has to be 5. Normally we will say our end index has to be 4, but actually what it does is it returns the elements from the first index, but it does not include the last index. So if we put 5 here, we're actually precising that we want to end at index 4. So the fifth index actually is not included. So what we want here is our page index being 1, 1 minus 1 is going to give us 0, times the number of records, still 0. So this start index is actually going to be 0, while 1 minus 1 is going to give us 0, times the number of records, which is 5, still giving us 0, plus 5, giving us 5. So our start index is 0 and our end index is 5. But as we said before, it does not include the last index. So we're actually going to have 5 elements, which is from 0 to 4, or from index 0 to index 4. And that's how this pagination function does to return us a fraction of our data array. So with this function in place, what we want to do now is we want to call this function here in our body to be able to return us that data, because right now we're sorting and we're doing all of these, but what we want is we don't want to display all the students data anymore, but we want to display a fraction of this data at any given time. So I'm going to wrap all of this inside our newly created paginate function. So I'm going to come here and add that paginate function. And now what we're saying is when you get the search data and you have sorted, because this actually, it does this on all our students array. It does the searching and the sorting on all our students array. But once we paginate it and return to us only a portion of that data and not all of these students data. So in doing this, we're ensuring that pagination works. And now if we save and go check over in our browser, we're actually going to see that pagination is going to work for our base case where we have our number of records to be 5 and our page index to be 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and save. And now if we check in our browser, we see we have just 5 records displayed on our table. That's from record 1 to record 5, and that actually tells us that our pagination is working just fine. But for now, when we click on these arrows, we don't still navigate between the pages, and that's because we haven't handled the on-click functionalities for these different arrows here. And we're going to do just that now. So I'm going to return back over here to where we have our arrows. And what we want to do is we want to add on-click event listeners to each of these spans, since as discussed before, it's not good practice to add the event listeners directly on the arrows. So the first event listener I'm going to add is going to be on this first keyboard double left arrow. And what we want to do is when we click on this, we want to actually return to our first page on our data table. So I'm going to add that, and now we have this on click event listener. So on click on this pan, what we want to do is we want to set our page index to 1. And since as this page index is a state, each time this is done, this page is going to be re-rendered. So what we want is when we are setting our page index to 1, as seen from this paginate function here above, 1 here means we are going to have 0 times all of this, and this is actually going to return us the first row of data elements. And that's that for our first arrow icon. On click on that, we just want to set our page index to 1, and that's going to do the magic for us. So for this second arrow, on click of it, we want to actually, well, go to like the previous page. So I'm going to add its own on click event listener. So we now have this, and for this left icon, for us to go to the previous page, what I'm doing is on click of this span, I first of all check the page index. If the page index is 1, it means we're already on the first page, so we don't want to go any further because actually we can't. So to stay the same, we're just still setting the page index to 1, meaning we're actually doing nothing. But else, if the page index is not 1, well, we want to decrement the page index, and that's going to do the magic for us from the paginate function, and it's going to return us now the first page rather than the page on which we were. Sorry, it's going to return us the previous page rather than the page on which we were. So that's it for our left icon. Now for the right icon, what we want to do is go to the next page. So I'm going to add the new on click for this guy. So we now have this, and what we are doing here is I'm going to make this to fit all, and what we're doing here is on click of this button, we want to go to the next page. So for that, we have to check if we are not already on the last page. And as we said, this data length state holds the number of records we have in our data table. So data length divided by the number of records we want to display. Let's say we have 5 records, right? Sorry, let's say we have 20 records and want to display 5 on our data table. Meaning, if we take 20 divided by 5, we're actually going to get the number of pages for that data table, because each page is going to contain 5 records. So we're going to have exactly 4 pages. Now, if we have 23 records also, and we divide that by 5, we're going to have 4 and some remains. But for 23 records to fit on different pages, we actually need 5 pages and not 4 pages, since as 4 pages are going to have 5 records to make that a total of 20, and the last page, that's the fifth page, is going to have those 3 records. So that's the need for this math.ceiling function, meaning whatever we get, if there's a remainder, round that up and give us the exact number of pages we need. So in case we have 23 and want to return 5 records per page, then we are going to actually have 5 pages and not 4 pages, and that's where this math.ceiling comes in. So with this, we are going to be able to check if we are already on the last page, and if we're on the last page, then we want to set our page index to be that last page index. Whereas if we are not on the last page, we want to increment our page index. So check if you're on the last page. If you are already on the last page, then still set it to be the last page, whereas if you aren't, increment the page index. And now for our last icon, which is on this last plan, so we have that, and all we practically want to do is we want to set the page index to be, well, the last page. That's the ceiling value of the number of records in our database divided by the number of records on a given page. And now the last thing we have to handle is this data length state, because so far there's no way in our code where we set the length of our database, or we tell our code the length of records we receive from our database. Now, if we return down here to where we're actually displaying the data, we see that our innermost state we are using to render data is this search data state. We know that we set our search students here. So after this, I want to add another line of code. And this line of code is simply the line of code I removed before. So each time the query changes, we are going to search for new students which match whatever is in the search bar and set our data length to be the length of that new array returned to us. Then from that new array, we are going to display those new students now on our data table. So with all of this done, I think our pagination functionality is in place. So I'm going to save this, and so now we have 5 records displaying. If I click on the next page, we have the last 6 and 7 records. And for pagination to function, well, for you to actually see pagination in action, I think we need to have more records. So I'm going to go to our JSON server database and actually add a lot of new records. So I'm going to come to our students.json. I'm going to just copy all of these or highlight all of these and replace this with this new data and save, then check back in our browser what we get. So we now see we have this data displaying on our data table, and on click of this we go to the next page, and here's the last page. So we go no further. Now we can return back to the first page or go back to the last page, and yeah, now the pagination is looking fluid, but we have to add now a couple of elements which are going to help us beneath here to, like, for example, a component to help us to know the current page on which we are. Like, because if we are here, we actually don't know the number of records in our data table to be able to know, like, on which particular page we are, or how many more pages are there ahead, and so on and so forth. So as we said, we're back in our code, and what we want to do is I'm going to add a first component, and that first component is going to tell us the current page on which we are. Whereas the second component is going to help us to be able to select the number of rows we want to be displaying on our data table at any given time. So I'm going to take down some of this TT in the footer. So let's take down this too. And here in this first TT, I want to put in the first component. So I'm actually just going to replace this TT with a new table data element. So what we have here is we have this new TT, and this TT just practically contains a select element or a select component from which you can choose the number of rows you want to display at any given time. Now feel free to replace these values by any number of rows you want to have depending on your needs. And on change on this number of values, what we want to do is we want to return back to the first page. That's we want to start back displaying from the first page, and we want to set the number of records to be that change values. Now we just have this CSS here to make the component display properly, and that's that for that first TD. Now I'm going to do for the second component, we're going to come to this other TD here and replace it by this new TD. And this TD, it practically just contains a span, and here in this span we are just displaying this text, that's page this of that. So we're saying page, the current page, which is simply the page index of the total number of pages in our application. So this is simply going to display something like page 1 of 5, or page 1 of 4, and so on. And the rest is just CSS to, there's some inline styling to help the components display a little better. Alright, so there are 2 new components in place. We're just going to go ahead and save. And now when we head back into our browser, you see everything displaying well alongside these two new components. The first, which can help us to change the number of rows on our data table. So we have that, and notice each time you change the rows, the number of pages on the data table, well, they increase or they decrease respectively or accordingly. So now with 3 rows, we have 7 pages, and now we can go to the last page and you see we're on page 7 of 7. We can return to the previous pages as well, and so on. But we now notice that, for example, this record on the first page, Brenda, if we go to the last page and try to search for the record Brenda, you see, we cannot get that record Brenda. And also it tells us we're on page 7 of 3, which doesn't make sense. And that's actually because each time you put something into, that's you type a string into this search bar, you are being returned a new array of students which meet, well, whatever is in the search bar. And along with that, you are being returned a new data length. So when you return that new data length, the number of pages will decrease or increase accordingly. But their page index remains the same because we were initially on page 7 before, well, carrying out this operation or typing this stuff into our text field. So what we want to do is each time we type something here, we want to return to the first page automatically. So I'm just going to head back to our code, and over here what I want to do is I want to add one line of code, and that's going to be to set the page index to 1. So each time we receive this new array of students, we want to return to the first page automatically and set the data length, that's give a new data length property, which is the length of the new students array we are being returned. So if we save this now and come back to our browser, you see we have been redirected back to the first page when we type this Brenda command. And yeah, we now have these records with a B arrow in them. So we have B arrow, B arrow, and B arrow. But let's take note again once more that if I delete all of these and let's say I increase the number of rows to 10 also, you see we get page 1 of 1, but we know that 20 records in our database, and that's actually because we have not included this data length property in our dependencies array. What we want to do is include this data length here in our dependencies array. So if we save this and come back to our browser, you see everything now is in order. We have those 2 pages. So if I search for a mic, see we get all the MIs, and yeah, if I clear that back, we have everything displaying the way it has to be. And with that, guys, we're done with our pagination functionality. So I'd like to call attention to the fact that this method of implementing pagination is just one of the ways of doing so. And usually what you want to do is, instead of getting all the data on your front end, what you usually do is you handle pagination directly from the back end, such that the request you are sending to the back end or to the database returns to you only the number of records you want to display. And I'm going to release a little video in which I'm going to be explaining how to handle pagination directly from the database on this data table. So see you guys in the next video, and thanks for watching.